whilst I've been resistant for the longest time to start a podcast, doing so was probably the sort of hinge that swung the biggest door towards me getting my message out there.
Generating one good lead per day is actually a really good benchmark to aim for.
A lead a day keeps the downturns away.
It is the practice of podcasting and the engaging with your thoughts. And that is the point, not how many tens of thousands of downloads you get.
And starting with that end in mind. And as you work all the way back through those 8 steps, you'll start to have a structure in place of a business that has all 8 marketing, sales, and delivery processes so that you can scale that business more consistently, more profitably, and more predictably.
Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time-consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
In this episode of Help Before You Sell, Pete and I talked to Gareth Everson, who is the founder of SystemsWise and also the author of a new book called Lemonade Plan, Predictable Profits from Sparklingly Simple Systems. So Lemonade is actually an acronym for all of the systems that you might need to implement in order to generate a consistent flow of leads and to convert those leads into both clients and then eventually to endorsements and referrals. So the 8 steps in the book that make up Lemonade as an acronym are lead generation, education, meetings, offers, new clients, add-ons, delivery, and endorsements. I really think you'll get a lot from this conversation. Let's jump in. Gareth, I was trying to remember, like when you first came into my orbit of awareness. And I think it was, I did my Infusionsoft partner certification, I think in 2015. And then you certify and you see all of these names online.
You did it at Heathrow, didn't you?
I did it in Heathrow, yeah.
So I remember, were you in Cato's group, Lisa Cato's group?
No, I was in Alison's group. So I know Alison from that group.
So 2 years in a row, I did the welcome presentation to new joiners at that Heathrow session. So that's the first place that I met you.
I don't remember that.
So
traumatic.
Unmemorable.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, so we were doing client accelerators in the next room to you. I was sort of the golden boy of doing and saying the right things with Infusionsoft back in those days.
I kept on seeing your face icon online, and it'd be that image where you're holding an award and standing about 2 foot above
everybody else. Yeah, I've still got that one.
Yeah. And then I was like, this guy's probably just another scumbag who's getting awards for flogging Infusionsoft apps. And then at some point, I've actually got to know you properly and realised that you're like actually a systems guy first and foremost.
I never sold apps. That everything else is accurate.
Yeah. So talk to us about your new book as well. So I've got your new book here, Lemonade Plan. I feel like this isn't a new book because we've been talking about this for quite a long time. And I was telling the guys that actually you came onto my podcast about 2 years ago to talk through the Lemonade steps. So actually, this has been in the works for a while. It's now finally here. But actually, since we recorded that conversation 2 years ago, the ordering has changed. And I wondered if you could maybe talk through the changing of the order.
Yeah. So it was inspired by you, wasn't it, Pete? A conversation that I had with you and how when I was planning the book, starting to frame the important steps in there and the things that people need to do, but in order to get to that, the things that people shouldn't do. And I think part of the thought process into the book was that whilst Lemonade represents the buyer's journey, leads through to endorsements, the whole movement of where sort of internet and digital marketing training and the marketing bros, if you like, were training people was around, you just need more leads, get more people into your funnel, da-da-da-da-da. And actually, the most successful businesses that I've worked with started the other way around and started by building community and building engagement and building basically love for what was going on and getting those reviews and referrals. And when you and I caught up probably about 6 months ago, Pete, and I explained how frustrating it was that people weren't connecting with the idea of reviews being the important factor and building everything that you do around that target outcome of being referred, getting repeat sales, or getting positive reviews. And you, as you always do, you found a great way to just really just nicely summarize it. And you said it's the start with the end in mind principle. It's the second part of Covey's seven habits of highly effective people. Yeah. And I'd read that book years ago. In fact, I first read it back in university in the 90s. And it's one of those books, it's one of those classics that you come back to every 5 or 6 years. And I just totally overlooked that one habit. And when you framed it like that, and I was thinking about how can I logically lay out the book, it just made perfect sense to me. So start with the end in mind. And it became a core tenet of the book.
Not as catchy, though, acrostically, not as catchy, but...
Well, do you want to say it in reverse or shall I? Rob does it quite well.
I'm not even going to attempt it, so...
L.E.M.O.N.A.D.E is basically the order in the book. Endorsements, delivery, create your offer, think about the add-ons that go with that core offer as a first point in call. So that's working backwards from the end of Lemonade back to the middle of it. And then it's all about, right, what do we do in order to find the leads that best fit that delivery model and that offer? And how do we then nurture them all the way through and have solid meetings with them? I wish we'd have had that conversation and that clarity probably 7 or 8 years ago, Pete, because at that stage when I was very heavily engaged, and we talked about Infusionsoft already, in that setting of working with what were back then, the people that used marketing automation back then were, generally speaking, early adopters and therefore had some success in their business. I was really lucky, I guess, or in the right place at the right time to work with some very, very successful businesses who followed that model, probably not thinking about, deliberately thinking about starting with the end in mind type model. But I'd worked with a lot of businesses that went on to be very, very successful who applied that principle. And then so the working with the end in mind and working with building engagement and getting great reviews and all of that kind of stuff, I tended to get drawn towards those businesses that were ethics and values driven and had a real purpose to what they were doing. So it wasn't all about just making the high ticket sale and then being done with them. I left those clients to Mr. Rob Drummond, who seemed to work with a lot of those over the years. But my clients were ones where there were great outcomes as a result, and there was a consistency to those business that were very values and very outcomes driven for their clients, in that they were focused on what the delivery was, what they wanted those clients to say as a result of it, so that they could get that positive word of mouth, and therefore what they were going to offer for them. And it's ended up being the core tenet of the Lemonade Plan book.
The book that you've written and published is out there. A book is a classic way of helping an ideal client before you sell to them. I mean, you are in a way selling to them because they've got to buy the book, but they're not buying the transformation, if you like, that you can really help them with. So you're helping before you sell now. Is that a concept that you, as you reflect on, has always been part of your entrepreneurial journey, or is it just something that you're doing now that you're not working one-to-one with clients?
It's always been part of me, actually, Pete, I would say. Even going back as far as certainly my first graduate job, but probably back into university life as well. I was probably always going to go down the pathway of becoming a consultant / coach. Something that I did all the way through university was help others in some way or another. I ran the basketball team, for example, when nobody else was stepping forward to do it. I volunteered in various different activities around campus during that time. in my adult life, one of the things that I do outside of work is I coach and volunteer at my kids' sports clubs. So the whole helping ethos and the whole supporting ethos has been very much part of me since as long as I can remember. So the help before you sell piece, when I did go into business and leave corporate life, I was a tech consultant with a large blue chip consultancy firm called Accenture out of university. I was with them for 8 years, working with some huge international retailers. But when I left that, when Jack, my eldest, was just 3 months old, because I didn't want to be one of those consultants that was jetting around the globe and not having a connection with my family, I joined another consultancy. It was a franchise, but it was a consultancy business, and I joined them. And again, I was helping, generally speaking, helping before we sold. That was like the dawn of blogging and digital marketing and sharing your insights and content online, first of all. And then when I broke away from that and started working more with my own clients, smaller businesses, first on AdWords, but then more meaningfully in the CRM and automation space, a lot of that whole world is very much around the, if not the helping, first of all, then the teaching, first of all. People need to understand what you do before they can connect with how you do it. And they need to understand what that means for them before they can properly engage with it and see the value of it. So the whole help before you sell concept has basically run every single business since I first flew solo after leaving the franchise in 2011.
And knowing what you know now about the book writing process, would you would you choose to do it again? And if so, would you do it early? Would you have done it earlier in your career, or has it taken the amount of percolation and kind of digestion of stuff to actually get to a point where you can?
Has it emerged in its own sweet time?
Difficult to answer that, and to know how I'd answer. I think this first book is better as a result for waiting. That being said, I think I could have probably made an even better job of it had there have been a different book further back in time. I first started thinking about this whole process when I became involved with a mentor of mine called Peter Thompson, who is a really prolific product creator and author. And I've been working with him since 2016. And since then, I've always had in my notebook ideas and little visions for what the book might entail. So what are we now? 9 years later from first thinking about writing my first book, it's only just come out. Would I still have done a book along the lines of Lemonade Plan, talking through those 8 key processes in any small business? I don't know. Yeah, I don't quite know how to answer that in a way that gives like a black or white, yes or no type answer. I think I would have still written a book like this at some stage, but I probably should have written other ones beforehand.
Yeah, I guess that's the question behind my question is, do you think it is a valid, realistic help before you sell strategy for all business owners at any stage of their journey? Or do you think that you need to get a couple of years under your belt, few client stories, case studies or whatever?
I'd perhaps argue that publishing a book is a sell before you help principle, because they can't access what's in it until they bought the book. That's your first sale.
I mean, we've talked about this recently on the podcast in terms of live events and so on, where it's basically a product and people have to pay. And you mentioned training a while back, and it's like, well, actually, for people to really engage with the training, sometimes they have to put a bit of skin in the game and pay a little bit of money. It's maybe just not your primary way that you earn money.
It's like your core offer.
Yeah, the core offer. And we've kind of speculated that if you were to run a live event like that, where it was just like a 3-hour session, like a discovery session type thing, like you might charge 50 quid or 100 quid for it and give people 50 quid back when they walk in the room. So yeah, there's a sale, but it's really about commitments, I think, and what's obvious to me, having written a few books, is that, yeah, you can publish some books, but it's also about getting people to read it. Like, it is quite a magical thing when someone comes through and they're like, read the book, they made notes in the margin, they've listened to a few podcast episodes. Like, that's a joyful. I will do those conversations every day of the week, but yeah, it's like you have to sell quite a few books to kind of find that person.
I said to you, didn't I, Rob, as soon as I'd published it live, anybody that gets from start to finish through the book is basically a perfect prospect for me to then work with and help further in a paid for basis. And the momentum that came with the publishing and the launch and the engagement and the enthusiasm was like nothing else I've ever known in business. Even when I launched a software company and there was a bit of gusto and I was part of an incubator to do that, there was a lot of positivity around that initially, but the book outweighed that because it felt more accessible to more people. However, what are we, 4 weeks on from book launch? I'm now in that nervous state as a first-time author of, is this message actually connecting with people who have bought it? I can see the sales figures on Amazon, and I get occasional DMs and I'll get comments on my posts and that kind of thing. And there was a lot of engagement around the AI employee concept that I want to build in to help readers of the book to implement the methods that are in there. But actually, are people really reading the book? Do people buy books to read, or do they buy books? And there's a whole irony here that people who are watching this online will see that behind me, I've got books on my bookshelf. I can honestly say, looking at those, I think I've read certainly 95% of them. But is the norm that people buy books to basically have on their bookshelf instead of buying books to get the outcomes from them that the author intended? And I don't know. It's all one big experiment, isn't it?
I sometimes buy books as a holding. It gives me the option to read it, and so I'll usually read some of all of them, but it's quite, of all of the, I mean, my book bank's like out of control, and my wife's constantly like chewing my ears about this. She's like, don't buy book. When the postie comes in there and you hear a slam as this book like slams down onto the doormat, and she's like, Rob, read the books you've already got on the bookshelf. So
it's not just me then.
Yeah, I'm like, it's not holding if it's books there. So I'm definitely guilty of that. But for me, it's about holding the option of reading it in the future. But I think the Netflix principle applies of like, okay, if you can convince someone to read first, even maybe the first 2 chapters, that's if they get beyond the first chapter, I think it's quite likely they'll get quite a long way through the book.
I haven't done with your books, Rob, I'm afraid. I'm just a hoarder of Rob Drummond authored books.
That's all right.
I mean, I think your preface alone, Gareth, should separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of your ideal reader and then your ideal client.
Maybe they've all chaffed off. All the all the people that have bought it, they've read the preface and gone, this isn't for me. This feels like hard work. To Rob's earlier point.
That's what I like. That's what I like about your work, though, because it's like, no. It is Lemonade. It is 8 steps. It's 8 processes. It's not 3 processes. It's not like some dumbed down enter your email address for like 5 simple steps. It's like, no, that's all bollocks.
If you want something meaningful, you got to do the work.
So yeah, that's kind of what I like about it. So it doesn't surprise me actually that like there might be like quite a sharp drop off, but I think the people who do come to it, I think, will be good.
What will be interesting, and maybe we should have been having this conversation in, say, 3 months' time after the AI employee has been out and released and all of that kind of thing. Actually, that as a solution and something that somebody can buy after buying and reading the book is something that definitely shortcuts a lot of that work, because it's basically your marketing team in digital format and using a series of tools, GPT tools, to help you crystallize the ideas around how you sell what you sell, and how you can help people to understand their problems a whole lot better. That's all come out of that whole idea and that whole concept around codifying all of this into an AI that helps you to relate those 8 core processes in Lemonade Plan into your actual business setting would never have happened had it not been for finally getting down and writing the book.
Tell us more about the AI employee for the interested listener who's like, hang on a minute. What is this?
What is it and why?
Well, what is the AI employee and why? Well, depending on your listener, if they are of a marketing ilk, they might want to close their ears for just a few seconds. But for those people who are, I think, your target listener for this podcast, who probably want to get their message out more, but are bogged down, not necessarily bogged down, but busy delivering what they do as a service to their client base.
They are the bottleneck in their marketing.
They're the bottleneck in their marketing, right? So having an understanding of what matters and why, and the Lemonade Plan's core premise is the right processes, importantly, in the right order and done the right way. So that, as long as they get that concept of there is a way to do these things and there is an order of events to do them in, then translating that into the busy, owner-managed small business where the business, whether it's just you or a small business, is paid for its core expertise. If you are the person who is the driver of that core expertise in the business, then you are always going to be involved in the delivery of that product or service, right? And so the challenge that we face as business owners who are selling us as our expertise is that if you're good at what you do, you're busy, and you're not struggling for new clients or new patients or new customers. However, there are times, and those times are cyclical, whether it's times throughout the year or it's recessionary type cycles. There are times when there'll be feast and famine in your business, unless you have an engine, a marketing and sales engine that is doing the work for you. It might be you managing it yourself, but you probably don't have the time to do that. So it's having the systems and it's having the processes in place that do it for you. But therein lies the problem, that if it's you and it's your expertise that is driving what that business does, when the heck do you find the time to do it? So whilst the book might only take a couple of hours to read, as Rob so eloquently says, it doesn't pretend that this is all switch button on easy. This takes work. And so having an AI employee that understands all of the core concepts that are in the Lemonade Plan book, understands all of the marketing principles that go around all of this, and because it's AI, draws from whoever the best is online at all of this stuff, the prompts that are engineered into the Hey Pip AI, the AI employee that I've built, is drawing from the best of the best on the internet who are good at this kind of thing. So positioning, sales messaging, education-based marketing, upsell type marketing, all of those kind of concepts. How do you build a landing page that engages people? That's what the AI does. And it takes out of the equation that learning process that somebody who doesn't have that established background in sales or marketing can develop the materials and the resources and the processes that are able to support them in their business.
And it's a first step solution, not a magic solution.
Oh, I don't know. It's pretty magical, Rob. No, it is a first step. It's a good first draft. It's a good first draft.
That's often the biggest hurdle, isn't it?
The biggest hurdle, Pete, as you say, is the blank page. It's staring at a blank page and thinking, what do I put on this landing page, or what do I put in this email, or what do I put in this proposal that is going to turn that person that has the problems that I solve into a really successful client? And it's that blank page problem that non-marketers really, really, really struggle with. And so as a result of that, they either do it very badly or they focus on the wrong thing. And hat tip there to the marketing bros that are selling lead gen services. Or they just do nothing and they leave it and they go back to the things that they've always relied on, like the word of mouth or we build our business through referrals. And you kind of go, really? And there are no gaps in all of that. or they just don't do it at all, and they end up getting comfortable with the discomfort of not growing their business in the way that they really wanted to.
We've kind of discussed in the past that achieving or generating one good lead per day is actually a really good benchmark to aim for.
A lead a day keeps the downturns away.
Wondered if you could talk through that. Because obviously to do that, it requires consistency, it requires systems, it requires various things that are probably missing, I think.
Well, that's the key thing, that principle of a lead a day keeping the downturns away forces you to think about and gets you to get right in your business. Because if you can get one a day consistently and predictably coming into your business, then it's actually not very difficult after that to start turning taps on that bring in more of those people who are similar. So yeah, I definitely teach this principle of the lead a day keeps the downturns away. That comes from being consistent with your posting in social media. It comes from being consistent with putting yourself out there into the world and creating content, and whether that's pillar content or just ad hoc type stuff. It comes from knowing what message you're sharing and how you share it is going to turn that person that sees it and becomes aware of it into somebody that becomes interested in doing that next thing around it and registering their interest or downloading that guide or attending your webinar or buying that book or watching that long form YouTube video or subscribing to a podcast. It can be any one of those things that turns that first interest and that awareness into something that's more meaningfully engaged.
Yeah, if you're not consistently putting it out there, you won't ever know what the one thing is. You just got to keep putting stuff out there, trusting that some of it will engage with some people at some point in time. You can't rely on the magic bullet that Rob was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think I qualify that a little bit more, Pete. It's not just posting for posting's sake or being utterly random around what you post. I work with a lot of businesses that are pretty random online, and there's not a great deal of consistency when they first start working with me around what they're posting, and they're just posting on a whim without any sort of strategic plan. Having pillars of content that you have and that you create perhaps on a monthly basis around certain themes, and then posting around that, but with the intent of getting somebody who connects with that message to then go and register their interest somewhere on a landing page or on your website or wherever it happens to be, to find out more and to learn more about solving that problem that they've got. I think that you can be a lot more focused and a lot more consistent around doing that than most businesses are.
When you were talking about your AI employee, you mentioned that it wouldn't exist without the book. And I know from previous conversation that the podcasting that you did prior to the book played a huge role in the book coming out. So we started with the AI. We're kind of moving backwards in time.
Start with the end in mind. The product that you sell.
Yeah. So would you talk to us and the listener about why you started a podcast, was helping before you sell, in your mindset about the podcast, and then where you got to in terms of your podcasting journey?
I think I nagged you to start a podcast, and that's how it started.
Well, as I was about to say, Rob's stolen the thunder of the story there. There are two answers to that. The one answer is, yes, of course I did. And I really wanted to get out there in the world and help people to understand the challenges that they were facing, and so that they could start to do something about it. And then the other angle is actually just on the back of, I tried other stuff and it just wasn't connecting with me. I blogged, which I really enjoyed doing, but never properly found the time to do it. I had guest posted in various different avenues, had tried to create an email list, but without really any substance to it. And it was, as Rob says, actually him just saying, yeah, stop resisting, just create a podcast, get out there, and start talking about what you do.
Start talking.
And actually, the podcast led into a YouTube channel, which I re-engaged with. I'd had YouTube channels before, but it just felt like hard work and wasn't really getting any traction. It also led into me crystallizing. This was the important takeaway from creating a podcast. It ended up in me crystallizing the way I wanted to talk about my topics. You can write as much as you want to write if you're of, let me rephrase that. Some people are very good at writing and articulating their thoughts in a written format in the first guise. You're very good at that, Rob. For me, it took being able to vocalize the challenges that my target market faces and some of the outcomes that they could be looking towards and some of the steps to get there. Me saying that on a podcast in a semi-live setting with you as my first listener, Rob, was probably the first time that many of those thoughts had been aired. I had lots of thoughts, and we're now up to episode 54, 55, something like that. So there isn't a lack of things to talk about, but actually that in itself, when you're running an expert business like we all are, is one of the challenges. And coming back to my earlier point, we just don't get the time to sit down and to properly do the marketing or to put that in a format that people can understand and engage with. And so whilst I've been resistant for the longest time to start a podcast, doing so was probably the sort of hinge that swung the biggest door towards me getting my message out there. Not all of those 54, 55 episodes are great. Some of them have really resonated with people who have become subscribers and clients of mine. Some of them have just kind of fallen by the wayside. However, not vocalizing some of those ideas and thoughts would have left me in exactly the same position that I was a year and a half ago, whereby I had lots of ideas and I was helping lots of people one-to-one and having some great success there. But in terms of more people understanding that and getting that message out to more people and helping more people, I wouldn't have been doing that. And the podcast swung the door into then thinking about the book again. The book has now swung the door into thinking, that's all very well. People are reading the book and engaging with it, I think. But how do they then translate what they've learned in there into something more meaningful? Because if all we do is keep on learning, and I talk about this in the book, you end up in this knowledge cycle, and experts fall into this trap all the time, where it's the not doing loop, that you keep learning about something and you feel like you have to learn about the next thing. And because you've learned about the next thing, how does that apply to the other things that you've learned? And before you know it, you're in this constant cycle of needing
in academia.
Not quite academia, but trapped in the knowledge cycle of constantly learning. Whereas if we take that small jump into another circle, which is actually the implementation cycle, and you do that one thing, and that one thing leads to that one next thing, and then you start to build momentum, having done things and having got feedback and having got engagement and having learnt from implementing where other stuff happens. And Rob, you suggesting to me, or almost, it wasn't suggesting really by the end of it, was it? It was kind of getting to the point of, Gareth, you've tried everything. You've tried a lot of other things. Why don't you give podcasting a try? That was the thing that jumped me from that learning cycle into the implementation cycle. And that held my feet to the fire. Every week it was back then, wasn't it, Rob, of recording at least one episode and starting that cycle. So there was always some content going out in a podcast format and in an email format and in a LinkedIn newsletter format eventually every single week around those themes that were in my head.
Were you having conversations with Rob, or were you just talking to the mic and Rob was just listening?
It was probably more of the latter, that we'd have a structure of what we talk about.
You talk for a bit, and then I would comment and give my questions as the first listener.
Yeah, we're also being a little bit polite there. When I said something that was dumb or didn't connect, Rob would pick me up on it, and we'd do it again.
Yeah, definitely. I could see it swinging the hinges the hinge that swung the big doors in terms of moving you towards the book. But you just alluded to there, I think, were you also leveraging that activity of having a conversation with Rob or yourself or whatever for the podcast? Were you then using that content to then create the other stuff that you had struggled to create in the past?
Yeah. So this, you are all longer term podcasters and have been in this sector a lot longer than I have. And the thing that I never connected with, whether this message is out there or not, but the thing that hit home for me the most from podcasting was that as soon as your voice is down on tape or digital tape, you listening back to that and going through that process of actually being your own first listener then generates that momentum of other things. I can use this in other ways. I can use the transcript in other ways. And especially with the emergence of AI,
the tools have come on so much.
The tools are incredible. The editing tools are fantastic, but the transcripting tools are outstanding. You can add captions automatically onto the video version. You can download the transcript from the episode. And then once you've got that, because I'm the geek that is in ChatGPT and Claude multiple times a day, I wanted to then systemize that process around then, okay, what then comes out of that? So I was downloading the transcript and I was getting my programmed knowledge base in Claude, where I've got, I think, 5 or 6 different project knowledge resources around handling my podcast. I was getting it then to process that in various different ways, whether it be in a blog format or a social media post format or this format works well for my email recipients. So that one, what would it be, Rob? We'd record for 20 or 30 minutes, and that would turn into a 15 to 20-minute episode. It was usually about half of what we recorded end up in the episode.
There's been efficiency gains as well, haven't there?
Yeah, there've been efficiency gains.
Both on the recording side and also even on the tools development side of things. Things like Riverside are always going to get.
Yeah, so the efficiency gains are twofold. One, on the technology. So what Riverside and what the Claude AI capabilities can do. But also, there's a human efficiency gain as well, that the more practiced you get at things, you know what you're going to, first of all, what you're going to connect with articulating, but also to a degree based on what you have seen and heard people engage with in the past, you kind of know the topics that are going to strike home. I genuinely thought it'd be, what did we start off with, Rob? Something like a 20 episode plan. I genuinely thought we'd struggle to get to the end of that 20 episode plan. But when we got to the end of that, there was already another 20 or 30 episodes that we could record.
I was a bit more confident.
Yeah, you were more confident because you'd been there and you'd seen it and you were the expert in the room around how we do it. I'm up to episode 55 now. And whilst we're taking a pause for the book launch and the AI employee launch, there will definitely be a season 2. And that season 2 will probably be slightly different to season 1. But whilst I don't listen to perhaps as many podcasts as you guys probably do, I can definitely see the wider benefits of having one. The wider benefit being not necessarily people downloading your podcast and listening to it. The bigger benefit for me, if we think about it as an 80-20 split, 20% of the benefit was having the podcast. 80% of the benefit is everything else that goes with that. And I would say that possibly the lion's share of that 80% benefit that's outside the publishing of the podcast itself, the lion's share of that was actually to me. And to me being able to frame in my own mind about how I could share my story and my learnings and my expertise in different formats. And the book wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done the podcast. And as a result of that, this AI employee service, the Hey Pip service that I'm in the process of launching at the moment, would definitely not have come had the book not existed. So it's almost like a domino effect of being able to create a whole marketing arm for your small business from one relatively small step of starting recording a podcast or starting a YouTube channel. But the key thing for me was just articulating what you know so that more people can see and hear it.
I think we're in danger of the listener thinking that we bribed you, Gareth, to say that, because that's so on message and on point for us as far as our philosophy of podcasting is that it is the practice of podcasting and the engaging with your thoughts and in the repurposing of content that comes out of it. That is the point, not how many tens of thousands of downloads you get per week or per month.
You haven't bribed me at all. I was, and Rob will testify to this, the biggest skeptic.
Gareth doesn't accept bribes. I've tried.
I do not accept bribes, but I was the biggest skeptic about the power of podcasting. Genuinely, and to a degree, until we were about 10 or 15 episodes into it, I still was. And it felt like it was a burden to go and record them and to think about it and to prepare myself for being on camera and on audio every single week. And at first, I was genuinely thinking, where will this go? But actually, most people go into it thinking, how am I going to connect with my audience? Actually, it's more of a mirror to be able to connect with yourself and your own message.
That's the iceberg underneath the surface, isn't it? Where the podcast itself is the iceberg above the surface, and you've got this much bigger part out of sight that's actually deeper.
Yeah, people see it as the. I mean, yeah. If you look at the top podcasts in the country, you've got the Stephen Bartlett's, you've got the Rest is Politics, you've got the likes of the all the various different sports ones, the high performance podcast, all of those that are almost like mainstream media just translated into a podcast format. The misunderstanding that business owners have around podcasting is that I need to be like Stephen Bartlett. And that's not the case at all. Actually, who you need to be is the version of you that you've never voiced, or that you've only voiced sitting at your desk, or to your internal team, or to that tiny handful of clients that you're working with in that moment,
who absolutely love you.
In relative terms, compared to the number of small businesses that are out there, small businesses are my target market, especially service-based businesses. There are millions of those out in the UK. Compared to the number of people that I can now get my voice out to, I'd only work with a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of those. I think at this time last year, when we were really starting to get going with the podcast, I'd worked with something like 375 businesses at that stage. Tiny proportion of the 5.5 million people who are self-employed or work in small business. Now, that's not to say that my little podcast would reach more of those, but I've seen through evidence of people engaging with it and ultimately becoming clients of mine that it works from a client acquisition perspective. But more importantly than that, like I mentioned before, you articulating what is inside you actually becomes, like I said before, that hinge to the door that swings something bigger and changes your mindset towards doing something else. So for me, it was podcast, book, software tool.
Never know it's been interesting to see which episodes people really engage with as well. It's been the ones that we almost didn't publish or were kind of spin-off episodes about password management. Everyone's gone crazy.
That's the one that you always bring up, isn't it, Rob? We did a 6-episode series on systems management, didn't we?
I'd be interested to see. So in my opinion, having been actively involved in it, I think the one that people should engage with is the Forks in the Road episode. That's what people need. But then there's a big difference, isn't there, between what people want and what they need. So
episode 24, the Forks in the Road episode. Was it episode 4 as well, where we talked about the different types, meeting your buyer at different stages in their journey? Top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. Those are probably the two of those 50 plus ones. Those are the two that are really the standout ones.
For the benefit of the listener, what are the Forks in the Road? Forks
in the Road come from when you get to a point where you can continue down one. You've got busy, you've got some traction, you've got busy, and you get to this fork in the road of, right, which way do I go? Do I hire my first employee, or do I make more of my own time by building the systems that set me up for future success? Now, whether that's at a point where you're a solopreneur and you're just getting there on your own, or whether you get to the point where there's 1, 2, 3 people in that business. And actually, in order to scale, you either need to bring in 3, 4, 5 more employees and all of the expense that goes with that, or you get to that fork in the road where you actually just take a step, you take a moment to think about, right, what are the important processes in terms of the way that I market my business, that I manage my sales pipeline, and that I deliver the services once I've sold that work. Can I codify those into processes and systems so that I can then teach it to the next employee or the next 2 employees? So instead of going out and having to think about growing a business beyond that first person or that first handful of people who you can communicate with very easily, the fork in the road principle is about just taking that step to make sure that you've got everything in place before you do it. Now, spoiler alert, if you go down the other pathway and get it wrong, where you're investing a lot of money in bringing on staff or trying the latest gizmo or gadget without any real structure or plan around it, the spoiler alert is that that road leads to a diversion. And before long, you just end up back at exactly the same fork you were at 6 months or 12 months before.
It's like Groundhog Day, only expensive.
Yeah. If indeed your business is able to survive going through that loop and that diversion. There'll be loads of people listening to this episode who have invested money in so-called gurus, or as I call them, the marketing bros, because it typically is a male-dominated, ego-dominated industry where you spend a lot of money to be part of whatever they call it, an accelerator or a mastermind type program. They all have the same kind of common names for it, but without getting the real foundations in place first.
I think we're approaching the problem of consistency just from slightly different angles. I think my work is about helping people to get started talking and explore their story and have the human elements. And I think you're doing the kind of tech and structure side of it. And I think you need both sides of that coin.
Totally. Start both of them, though, and I think you'd agree on this, Rob, start from a point of knowing who you are and who you serve. That's the commonality between the two of them.
No, I have one eye, as I always do, on the clock. I think it's been it's pretty fascinating, wide-ranging conversation, touched on a lot of episodes. I mean, just I guess one last question. We don't know whether the listener's starting out on their own entrepreneurial journey or is much further along. Is there any universal help before you sell advice, Gareth, that you could impart just as we're coming to a close?
Am I allowed to give a couple?
Of course.
So one from bitter experience, I launched a software company in 2017 and invested, I won't go into the full specifics, but it was a 6-figure number into that software startup, not necessarily on a whim, but out of anger about the direction that the software industry that I served was going in. Had I got that time again, and my help before you sell message to you, dear listener, is this: if you have a big idea where you think there's a gap in the market for what that big idea could solve, before you go and spend a lot of money or go out for investment or team up with partners or go down that pathway of investing lots of time, resource, and cash into exploring that idea, how can you do that? How can you do that thing, or how can you start to address that problem without really spending very much money at all? Is it through putting yourself out there through a YouTube channel, a podcast, or writing your first book and putting that into words around reaching an audience that you can engage with first to see if others have that problem and it's a meaningful market problem that's worthwhile investing more into? That would be my first takeaway. What's your lowest cost way of exploring whether that is really a meaningful problem? And in order to prove that it's a meaningful problem, somebody has to give you some money in order to explore that further. Okay. it's not just people coming back to you and saying, oh yeah, that's a great idea. But if they're never, ever going to buy it, people said until the cows came home that my software product was a good idea. But did it get explosive growth and traction in the market? No, it only ever did okay. It didn't really go beyond that. And eventually it ran out of steam. So that's my first piece of advice that people should follow. The second part, and the second and third parts are both in the book. The core tenet of the book, outside of the processes, is that you're measured on success through two things in your business. One is what I call a lagging indicator. Is your business successful based on this indicator? And that indicator is, are you able to sell and deliver your service and make a profit doing it? So that's a lagging indicator. If you've made profits, that says that you've done that product or service successfully as a profitable venture in the past. Now, why is there a second one? The second one is a predictor of future success. So when you've earned that profit through doing the work that you do, are people delighted enough with that in order to give you endorsements into others, whether they be reviews or referrals into others? If you're hitting both of those, the profit and getting systematic endorsements for what you do, the reviews, referrals, and real positivity that comes from what you're doing, then you've got a solid business venture on your mind. And it doesn't matter what that is, what problem you're solving. If you've got those two things in place, then you're doing pretty well. So then coming on to the third, help before you sell, the third one is that in order to make the most then of that business, what you need to have in place is a systematic way to do that consistently and predictably, and to be able to scale all of that. And that's where the 8 process steps in Lemonade leads through to endorsements really comes into its own. And starting with that end in mind. So if you're already getting endorsements, you've covered the final E off, but then working backwards through how you deliver it and what your offer looks like in order to deliver it will put you in a good place. And as you work all the way back through those 8 steps, you'll start to have a structure in place of a business that has all 8 marketing, sales, and delivery processes in place so that you can scale that business more consistently, more profitably, and more predictably.
Or if you don't want to scale it, you can make more money with less time because you've got systems that are driving a lot of the work.
I would argue that's scaling it.
Fair point.
I think there's a slight mindset shift that maybe has to happen in some cases where a lot of business owners just think they're not systems people. It's too complicated. I can't do that. Maybe they can do it with a bit of guidance. And I feel like that for people who are ready to spend a bit of time on it, but still leave time to do what they're doing in their day-to-day activity. I think you're offering a path for that.
Yeah, and I would say as well, people call it systems, people call it processes, and it has this immediate connection with it being something that's techie or something as a result, because when you say techie to people, they then immediately associate that with being complicated.
Or they think of software.
Because the software, and this is one of my other points, the software industry has invested so much in their own PR and their own messaging that the association between software and system are, generally speaking, with the wider population seen as one and the same thing. But actually a system and processes that sit underneath those systems are actually really quite distinct from software. The fact that you can manage some of those processes and systems using software is a different matter, but they are two very different things. So even if you're listening to this and you feel like very much a non-techie, don't be put off by us talking about processes and systems here. If you're good at doing what you do and people enjoy working with you in the way that you do that, then you've probably got some of those 8 processes working pretty well already, perhaps even without any tech.
I guess a final question on this point is there a type of business owner who kind of probably does need some help with this and maybe needs someone in like the systems management role in their business?
I would say it's very, very difficult and very costly for somebody to hire somebody just purely as a systems manager. However, any business owner should have a grasp and a concept of the processes and systems that they need in place and need to be running in the right way, in the right order, and with the right consistency to be able to run their business. And in order to get that guidance and that advice, you guys share that on this podcast, but they can also pick up those insights if they use resources like my book, Lemonade Plan, as a start point.
We will link to that in the show notes. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Thanks, Gareth. We set you a challenge of setting the bar high for future guests. You're the first guest that we've chatted to on this podcast, and you have set the bar exceedingly high. So thanks for doing that.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.